Welcome to the Unheard Perspective podcast, which invites you into perspectives of unique journeys, personal experiences, values, and political ideologies. We're your hosts, Sasha Riva
and Basil Said.
And today we have a special guest with us, Aaron Carlson. He is current senior at Grace College in Winona Lake, Indiana, where he will graduate with bachelor's in elementary education, political science, and master's in higher education.
Let's talk about what Aaron has just done. He had the opportunity to partake in the Emerson Fellowship in 2023 through StandWithUs organization, which is a leading nonprofit that educates people around the world about Israel. And through this, he joined StandWithUs as the Christian Outreach Campus Liaison for 23-24. Let's dive into an actual discussion here. Aaron, I know you have been to Israel during the wartime, and let me ask you, what was it like to visit Israel in a state of war and conflict?
First of all, thank you, Sasha and Basil, for the opportunity to come on the show. It's an honor to talk to you guys today about my experience in Israel, some of what I learned, some of what I saw as I was there, and especially in terms of my most recent trip. I recently returned from my second trip to Israel, this time with Hasbara Fellowships, where I met firsthand with survivors, heroes, family members of the hostages who were brutally abducted on October 7th. It was difficult to hear the stories of what people went through that day and in the weeks afterward. Yet it was important because I can return to the United States and share those accounts with those who are either unaware of what is happening in Israel or those who are misled by misinformation on social media.
So how did seeing the destruction and the fear firsthand affect your view on the situation as an American who never visited that region?
Having visited Israel in May of 2023 with Passages, I had the opportunity to see Israel before the war, but having seen it afterward, my heart's truly broken for the families that were directly impacted on October 7th. The group and I visited Sderot, which was one of the several cities that Hamas terrorists overran border security and invaded on October 7th. And we even went directly to the security center where we watched some of the footage of what happened, which was definitely difficult to bear because it demonstrated how Hamas had targeted IDF communication systems and targeted security forces within the Gaza envelope. Seeing in person made it all real because people can see something on the news or social media, but it doesn't truly connect unless you've witnessed the destruction firsthand. We even visited the car graveyard. I'm sure people have maybe seen videos of the cars that were burning along the roadside, and those vehicles have now been scrapped in one facility close to the Gaza envelope. And it demonstrates the horror that took place then and really gives a mental picture of what happened.
And with all that, did anything change during your visit? Do you see the IDF soldiers differently? Do you see Hamas differently? How is your idea of Israel and Palestine changed?
I think most human beings still want to see peace when it comes to Israel and Hamas. It's challenging to think about how radical ideologies can enable people to hate someone based on their ethnicity, based on their religion, and that's what we're seeing take place with terrorists from the Gaza Strip. My resolve to support Israel after my visit has probably increased more than ever. Even though listening to the stories was difficult, it is important that people in the United States, especially college students who refuse to acknowledge the right for Israel to exist, hear the accounts and understand the conflict more than ever. It was inspiring to hear from peers on the trip who daily experience hate on their campuses because their resolve, their support for Israel has been stronger forever. And I think that's true for myself as well. Understanding that the fight and the conflict in Israel is taking place on America's college campuses, even to this day.
So when it comes to religion, why should we care as Christians about Israel? How does it impact us Americans who live here?
Christians should care about Israel because it is the birthplace of our faith. A good friend of mine put it best when he said that while I'm not a Jew, nor am I Israeli, I am a Christian in America with a heart for humanity and the truth. And that is why I unapologetically stand with Israel. Israel also exists as our strongest ally for peace in the Middle East, from their military intelligence support to their shared democratic values that espouse human rights more than any of their neighboring nations. Israel is the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, promised directly from God, that is at the heart of modern Zionism. And to be anti-Zionist essentially is to be anti-Semitic, because it is hating against the Jewish people and their right to live in the land of Israel.
So when it comes to news on the media, where do we find the information about the actual things that are happening in Israel and not propaganda? Because currently right now, media is taking over and they can say whatever you want and people are believing it. And we don't really know what's truth or what's a lie.
I think that's the danger of social media and popular news, because we can say anything and people take it as truth. So if for most Americans, we're not able to go to Israel to see what happened. We can only see pictures and read about what happened online. But my recommendation is to not only read about the current conflict, but also read to learn more about the underlying challenges that have prevented lasting peace well before the formation of modern Israel in 1948. Some works I recommend include The Case for Zionism by Dr. Tommy Ice, What Should We Think About Israel by Dr. Randall Price, and In the Lion's Den by Ambassador Danny Danone. For daily news, check the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post, and I also trust Stand With Us and Passages to provide accurate information about the current state of Israel. It's important that we are reading to learn more about the situation, to broaden our understanding of what's happening and develop a better understanding of how we can make a difference here in America.
The organizations that you mentioned or advocates are they pro-Israel, and are they neutral, or do they share all perspectives or just one side of the story?
Both organizations want to see peace when it comes to Israel. Stand With Us is one of the leading nonprofits that educates people about Israel, but they would not say that their support is one-sided. Rather, they want to see peace on both sides, and that includes helping the governments understand how they can best meet the people's needs. And I wish that both nations would do what's best for their own citizen. Passages as well looks to understand both sides of the situation, especially understanding the views of Christians, both in Israel and in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank.
Okay, and what would you say about the overreach of Israeli attacks, how their attacks led to displacement of many Palestinian families who really had nothing to do with the conflict? For example, I saw a video on Instagram about some IDF soldiers. They were filming the destruction of a classroom in Palestine. They were making fun of it, and they continued on to whatever they were doing. Does that represent the view of the Israelis or those who support Israel in this current conflict?
I think it has been well documented, but the IDF takes extreme measures to ensure that civilians are spared at all costs. That includes the use of different military technology to ensure that their targets are precise, and then also informing people in neighborhoods of their attacks well in advance before Israel goes in with the IDF. I'm saddened that Hamas has built and used humanitarian aids to fortify schools, hospitals, residential neighborhoods to, in effect, use women and children as human shields. Basil, you can understand this some, but I'm also saddened that Egypt has placed a large border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt to prevent refugees from escaping the Gaza Strip. Israel is there for refugees, but they're also working to provide resources for their own refugees, numbering about over 100,000 from the surrounding Gaza envelope, as well as from the northern cities where Hezbollah has launched a slew of rockets against those cities. Several hundreds of thousands from each city. Well, overall, 30,000 from Sderot, as well as around 70,000 that are also refugees, mostly going to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to seek refuge.
I think it's pretty interesting. Yeah, you mentioned Egypt has done that, which is true. But I think it's very interesting that a country as south as Africa really tried to show the world that Israel is at fault for continuing the attacks, which many actually expected the Middle Eastern countries to do that. But here we are, South Africa has done it. At what point do you see ceasefire, and what do you think about that recent recent South African attempt to investigate and get involved within the International Court of Justice?
Great question. So for context, South Africa applied to the ICJ, or International Court of Justice, alleging that Israel is committing genocide, which genocide is the gravest of crimes under international law, not something to take lightly. The allegation of genocide is an attack on Israel's character and their right to exist. If the ICJ ruling goes in favor of South Africa, it would set a precedent that nations experiencing terrorist threats may struggle in self-defense. As far as a ceasefire, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been clear from the beginning that a ceasefire is achievable once the threat of Hamas has been eliminated from the Gaza Strip. It's the sad reality, but it's been said before. If Hamas were to lay down their weapons today, there'd be a ceasefire. But if Israel were to lay down their weapons today, it would only cause the death of more Israel civilians, which is ceasefire is achievable, but it has to be once Hamas has been eliminated.
When you say Hamas, do you mean Hamas soldiers, Palestinian citizens that just support Hamas, or just people that live in the Gaza Strip? What do you mean by that?
The goal of the IDF is to eliminate Hamas as the military force of terrorists that planned and executed the attacks on October 7th. That is the prime focus. Sadly, we do see reports that many people living within the Gaza Strip, as well as the West Bank, support Hamas ideologies. But the goal of the IDF has been clear that President Herzog even mentioned this when I met with him while in Israel. Their goal is not to hurt Palestinian civilians. It is to push back against Hamas terrorists that planned and executed the attacks on October 7th.
So after visiting Israel, how did your mindset change about the nation and the region as a whole? What has changed up after you visited that place?
The one thing that stood out to me the most was something that I learned from some of the local citizens about what they've been seeing on the news, what they've been seeing in the media. And that is the changing terminology from "we will win," which was mostly the very beginning of the conflict, shifting it to say "together we will win." It's a form of hope that despite everything that's happening, Israel will push through, as they've done throughout history. Several times we read about how Israel has faced extreme challenges, yet Israel still survives. I believe that is largely due to God's providence. So as far as like the citizen perspective, it's a form of hope, even though they know so many people that have been directly impacted through what happened on October 7th.
So were there any efforts or initiatives of attacks you observed during your visit in Israel?
We had the opportunity as a group to visit Sderot, which was one of the main cities that was attacked by Hamas. And in Sderot, our group was close enough to see smoke billowing up into the sky from the Gaza Strip. The IDF was in the process of transporting tanks from the southern point of the Gaza Strip towards the north in an effort to make move towards Gaza City. Thankfully, our group was safe for the entirety of the trip, but rocket sirens blared in several of the cities that we visited throughout the length of our trip.
I remember when I visited Sderot, it has impacted my life since, because we were visiting a playground. I don't know if you've been there, where it's this big snake that is basically a bomb shelter for the kids that are playing, and you have only 15 seconds to hide. It's really scary to realize how many children are in danger during their just playtime, and I wish more people understood how Israel lives during the wartime and the situations that are happening there.
While in Sderot, we not only had an outlook perspective to see into Gaza, but we also visited an elementary school and saw how Israel had invested into fortifications for those bunkers, as you had mentioned, to help prevent kids as much as possible. Yet, as you said, there are at most 15 seconds from the point that the sirens go off to where they have time to get to those bunkers of safety before the rockets start hitting.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for sharing your unheard perspective. It's really interesting to see how your mindset evolved before and during your time there. We also look forward to having someone that could share more about Palestine, more about their perspective. That would be really interesting as well, especially in America, where we have people mostly who don't know really what's going on, and they support Israel as our government supports it. So thank you, Aaron.
This discussion about Israel-Palestine conflict is very hard to talk about, because it comes to basically life decisions that our governments are making for those people when we support them or we are standing against them. And people need to hear more perspectives perspectives to better understand the situation when it comes to Israel.
All as we end this episode, we encourage our listeners to look for reliable sources of information, especially when trying to understand complex events that's been happening for more than a decade, and especially in Israel and the whole broad of the Middle East. And it's important to know and distinguish between fact-based reporting and just merely propaganda to form opinions that are well-informed.
And as we wrap up this episode of the Unheard Perspective podcast, we want to thank you to our guest, Aaron Carlson, for sharing his experiences and insights.
And we look forward to having you hopefully again on the podcast, and we also look forward to bringing more unheard perspectives in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sasha and Basil, for the opportunity. I look forward to sharing more about Israel's story through plenty of opportunities.